Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I think we should headline it the year of the virus. And indeed, this is from 2Goal. This is the coronavirus story, and I thought it was visually very arresting. Macro thoughts: the Philippines becomes the first major country to halt its entire market, including stock, bond, and currency trading, in the midst of the coronavirus outbreak. That's from Tracy Alloway. And the worry is that markets will all be shut down, that we'll get a rolling shutdown. 10 days ago, we revised global growth down from 2.6% to 1.6% due to COVID-19. We're now revising global growth down to 1%. That's Robin Brooks at IIF. I think we'll be at 0. And then I saw a headline from ABC: the stock market just opened and just closed. And that was yesterday when the circuit breaker was hit immediately. As I said on the 24th of February, a rate cut or even 4 will produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. Policymakers cannot vaccine the market with rate cuts. This virus is non-linear and exponential. Tracy Alloway again: important caveat to the US markets are like a roller coaster right now analogy. Roller coasters are fun. 18 trading days, 30%, nothing is even close to this, Bianco research. Tavi Costa, to whose idea I subscribe: long gold, short stocks. It's time for both legs to start working in tandem. When the yield curve first inverts by more than 70%, buy gold and sell stocks for the next 2 years, he says. The gold to S&P ratio is up 25% since August 2019. First it was gold, then stocks. Now we're at the place where historically both legs start to work in tandem. It's been a little bit tough for gold bugs, I must admit. As I said, fantasy predictions of a V-shaped recovery in China have been dashed. In fact, China cannot just crank up the factory because that will risk a second round of infections. Goldman Sachs cuts China's full year 2020 GDP growth forecast to 3% from 5.5% previously, Rover 829, and cuts first quarter GDP estimate for China to minus 9% year on year from plus 2.5% previously. In 2016, I spoke about the bond markets and I said if volatility spikes, positions are going to be reduced en masse. And I quoted Hotel California: mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. And indeed that's happened, but several years later. So we spend more than $700 billion on imaginary risks, from listening to IYI geopoliticians and journos, when in fact the true enemy is a virus you pick up by doing a high five with the bartender, Nassim Taleb. Which speaks to that point I was making. World economists and policymakers are linear in their thinking and are flummoxed by the exponential multiplicative nature of the coronavirus. Shares of Eurozone banks have halved in less than a month. This is the FTSE Euro First Eurozone Banks Index from John Authers. I went back because I needed some happiness, and this was the first sunrise after 40 days of a polar night in Murmansk, northern Russia. Can confirm people are losing it on the snowy dance floor. This is the best image I could capture about man-animal conflict in India. There is an elephant in this picture. It's a river and surrounded by some 5,000 people. Parveen Kaswan. That day we had to call armed police to provide a path to the herd stuck in the river. Wildlife is fine, human are difficult, he said. Central Tokyo at 5:30 p.m. That was yesterday from Marika Katunuma. The Italian tenor Maurizio Marchini singing for his neighbors in Florence. Very beautiful it was. Take a look at the first service of Orthodox Church in Pyongyang since the COVID-19 quarantine measures were put in place in late January on Sunday. Pictures via the Russian embassy in the DPRK via Shen Shiwei. Putin unleashes strategic hell on the US. I am an avid board game player. I'm not much for the classics like chess or Go, preferring the more modern ones. But regardless, as a person who appreciates the delicate balance between strategy and tactics, I have to say I am impressed with the Russian President Putin's sense of timing. Because if there ever was a moment where Putin and Russia could inflict maximum pain on the United States via its Achilles heel, the financial markets, and its unquenchable thirst for debt, it was this month, just as the coronavirus was reaching its shores. All of that in the service of playing the game until you find the perfect moment to punch through and achieve victory. Having watched Putin play this game for the past 8 years, I firmly believe there is no one in a position of power today who has a firmer grasp of this than him. I do believe this move to break OPEC Plus and then watch Mohammed bin Salman break OPEC was Putin's big judo-style reversal move. And by doing so in less than a week, he has completely shut down the US financial system. At one point during trading that day, the entire US Treasury market went bidless. There was no one out there making an offer for the most liquid, sought-after financial assets in the world. The Fed needing to add $1 trillion in 3-month repos clearly means they understand that they're looking out to the end of the quarter as the next problem, and beyond that, it means, in short, the world financial markets have completely seized up. In the first part of the aftermath of Putin's decision, the dollar got whacked as European and Japanese investors who had piled into US stocks as a safe haven sold those positions and brought the capital home. And Putin understands that a world awash in debt is one that cannot withstand the currency needed to repay that debt rising sharply. Trump's use of sanctions on Europe to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was stupid and short-sighted. It ensured that Russia would be merciless in its response and only delay the project for a few months. Better to take the world oil price down well below US production costs, which ensure that Trump's prized LNG stays off the European market, as the myth of US energy self-sufficiency vanishes in a puff of financial derivatives smoke. Now Trump is facing a market meltdown well beyond his capacity to fathom or respond to. Putin just told the world he's not riding his country's oil and gas resources like a cash cow, but rather as an important part of a different economic strategy for Russia's development. It's like watching someone playing the first half of a game, implying one strategy, and making a critical shift to a different one halfway through, taking advantage of their opponent's carelessness. It rarely works, but when it does, the results can be spectacular. Game, set, match, Putin. October 2015, I called him a geopolitical grandmaster. December 2016, I talked about the parabolic rebound of Vladimir Putin. Whilst Russia's growth has been disappointing, even by the new emerging market secular stagnation standards and ratings haven't recovered since the 2018 pension reform. However, geopolitically speaking, Putin's ROI, in my opinion, is parabolic. Crises are treated as day-to-day public relations problems by Mr. Trump, who thinks ahead in short increments of time, and early on in his presidency told aides to consider each day as an episode in a television show, El Rosen. That's why I said it will be a Trump virucide. He is already behind the curve, and the curve is parabolic, exponential and non-linear, and therefore it is over. The virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded. The normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen. Unbreakable morale, no supply chain, lives off the land, infinite reinforcements, and fully decentralized. And that speaks to that other quote by William Burroughs: a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. Over 14,000 new cases of COVID-19 were reported in a single day today. Exponential growth is continuing unabated, Zorina Q. Far more cases are reported around the world every day than when the epidemic peaked in China, 4,000 new cases per day. And that's why I said the viral moment has indeed arrived. Examine carefully the log chart. We will reach 1 million cases of COVID-19 cases in the world in about 14 days. Total deaths worldwide are now 6,440. But as noted on the chart below, over 1/4 of total deaths came in the last 3 days, Bianco research. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. Probably the scariest exponential growth charts you will see in your lifetime, again Zorina Q. Western countries' coronavirus cases are increasing by 33% a day. Western countries are on the same trajectory as Italy, Mutari Adhanan. Then I went back to that article by Thomas Puyo, Coronavirus, Why You Must Act Now. It's coming to you, it's coming at an exponential speed, gradually and then suddenly. It's a matter of days, maybe a week or two. 24th of February, I said we are past the point of no return and that this was an unprecedented moment. And I quoted Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? 16th of February, let me tell you, world, I do not believe. If 1,000 challenges lie beneath your feet, count me as number 1,001. I don't believe the sky is blue. I don't believe in thunder's echoes. I don't believe that dreams are false. I don't believe that death has no revenge. Gladwell's tipping point is the moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point. It's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. Total deaths worldwide are now 6,440, but as noted on the chart below, over 1/4 of total deaths came in the last 3 days, Bianco research. And that's why a virus is non-linear and exponential. Imperial College reports suggest 1. The seeming success of South Korea and China in containing COVID-19 is a false dawn. 2. Effective containment will mean universal house arrest for 18 months while we await a vaccine. Otherwise, the best case scenario is 1 million US deaths. The article itself is on Rich Wrap-Ups. The global impact of COVID-19 has been profound, and the public health threat it represents is the most serious seen in a respiratory virus since 1918, the influenza pandemic. Mitigation. 2 fundamental strategies are possible. Mitigation, which focuses on slowing, but not necessarily stopping epidemic spread, reducing peak healthcare demand while protecting those most at risk of severe disease from infection. And suppression, which aims to reverse epidemic growth, reducing case numbers to low levels and maintaining that situation indefinitely. For countries able to achieve it, this leaves suppression as the preferred policy option. The major challenge of suppression is that this type of intensive intervention package, or something equivalently effective at reducing transmission, will need to be maintained until a vaccine becomes available, potentially 18 months or more, given that we predict that transmission will quickly rebound if interventions are relaxed. COVID-19 pandemic is now a major global health threat. As of 16 March 2020, there have been 164,837 cases and 6,470 deaths confirmed worldwide. Global spread has been rapid, with 146 countries now having reported at least 1 case. World faces the same challenge today with COVID-19, a virus with comparable lethality to H1N1 influenza in 1918. Suppression here, the aim is to reduce the reproduction number, the average number of secondary cases each case generates, R to below 1, and hence to reduce case numbers to low levels, or as for SARS or Ebola, eliminate human-to-human transmission. With the parameterization above, approximately 1/3 of transmission occurs in the household, 1/3 in schools and workplaces, and the remaining 1/3 in the community. Infection was assumed to be seeded in each country at an exponentially growing rate, with a doubling time of 5 days from early January 2020, with the rate of seeding being calibrated to give local epidemics which reproduce the observed cumulative number of deaths in Great Britain or the US seen by 14 March 2020. For an uncontrolled epidemic, we predict critical care bed capacity would be exceeded as early as the 2nd week in April, with an eventual peak in ICU or critical care bed demand that is over 30 times greater than the maximum supply in both countries. Our projections show that to be able to reduce R to close to 1 or below, a combination of case isolation, social distancing of the entire population, and either household quarantine or school and university closure are required. Measures are assumed to be in place for a 5-month duration. Akbar al-Bakr, the Qatar Airways CEO, is always an interesting Elon Musk type character. During the incubation period, they say this virus can be transmitted. There is no scientific evidence for that. It is just, a fear factor. Well, what evidence do you have that on every single airplane you do not have 3 or 4 people with contagious disease sitting next to you? I think that is the base case. International markets, let's turn to those. Currencies. Euro is at 111.12, dollar index 98.374, Japanese yen 106.89, Swiss franc 0.9503, the pound 122.23, God, that's fallen dramatically. Australian dollar 0.6072, India rupee 74.0225, South Korean won 12.39.664, Brazilian real back over 5, Egyptian pound where they cut rates 300 basis points, 15.74, and the rand at 15.75. Dollar index 98.374, euro dollar 111.13. Coronavirus will bankrupt most airlines by the end of May unless governments and the industry take coordinated action, an aviation consultant warned. Many airlines have probably been driven into technical bankruptcy or substantially breached debt covenants already, Sydney-based consultancy Kappa Centre for Aviation warned in a statement. Carriers are depleting cash reserves quickly because their planes are grounded and those that aren't are flying more than half empty. Coordinated government and industry action is needed now if catastrophe is to be avoided. Otherwise, emerging from the crises will be like entering a brutal battlefield littered with casualties. And this is because we're moving from a situation of hyper-connectedness to a situation of quarantine. A country like Ethiopia, where the airline industry is a huge source of funds, we anticipate $260 million will be lost to this scourge, which will have big implications for its GDP, according to Bartholomew Armour of the UNECA via Habesh _. Commodity markets at lowest levels since the 1970s. Liz Ann Saunders, those commodity economies, I've written about it in the context of Africa, have crashed. The virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. Gold, 1483. I'd forgotten the silver bubble of 2011. Silver is now down 76% since then, at its lowest since 2009, John Authers. Brent oil below $30, which is pretty rare, JS Blockland. Emerging markets on the 2nd of September last year, I spoke about the China emerging markets frontier feedback loop phenomenon. And I said this phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. The fallout is being experienced as far away as Germany Inc. The rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. This pressure point will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. COVID outflow episode digs deeper and now stands at around $90 billion of outflows from emerging markets since January 21st, Econ chart. Mexico in a real policy dilemma with the Mexican peso trading at a record low, V. Patel FX. Brazil's real tumbles below 5, eyeing last week's record low of 5.80278, Jamie Reuters. February 21st, there it is, Brazil's real falls through 440, and now we're falling through 5. Sub-Saharan Africa, this is a video of locusts migrating in the desert during a strong wind. The swarm forms a group in teardrop shape pointing at the wind to prevent single locusts being blown away. W.B. Yeats, 1865. My article in the Africa Report, Debt, Virus and Locusts Create a Perfect Storm for Africa. And in there's a lot of detail about how I could see it, and I was sort of poo-pooing people who were saying it's not coming to Africa because of epsilon theory, what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Nothing, cluster, and we're now in that cluster phase on the continent. Then boom, and we're on the cusp of that boom moment. I was talking about those countries in the line of fire: Angola, Congo, Brazzaville, DRC, Equatorial Guinea, Zambia, Nigeria, South Africa, and that they were heavily borrowed going into this crisis. I said Nigeria's oil revenue is cratering. There is $16 billion of hot money parked in short-term certificates, which is all headed for the exit as we speak, and that a currency devaluation is now predicted and predictable. I said South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola are poised to dive into deep recession. And I raised the locust invasion, which according to FAO could turn 500x by June. Nigerian central bank will be unable to maintain the naira's value for much longer as a slump in oil prices drains foreign reserves, according to Bloomberg. Since the virus first appeared in China late last year, the naira has weakened 1.3% on the spot market. The currency's decline picked up pace in February when reserves fell more than 4.5% to $36.1 billion. If the base and bear case scenarios play out, it's difficult to imagine the Central Bank of Nigeria being able to hold the currency at these levels. Analysts at First Rand, they estimate the naira is 17% overvalued. Concerns of a devaluation have also weighed on Nigerian stocks. Benchmark index in Lagos fell 1.8%, taking its decline in the past 5 days to more than 12% and dragging the gauge to levels last seen in early 2016. To keep the naira stable, Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele has burned through a quarter of the nation's reserves since June. Oil futures fell more than 30% in New York and London, biggest drop since the Gulf War. 9th of December, I touched on this and I said everyone knows how this story ends. When the music stops, everyone will dash for the exit. And that foreign investors are propping up the naira to the tune of $16 billion via short-term certificates. Consider that on Thursday, February 20th, the price of a barrel of Angolan Cabinda oil was $62.19. Yesterday, just 26 days later, the price has fallen by almost half to $32.21. That's Eric Olander. Have a look at this very short footage of President Ramaphosa teaching his citizens that they have to do the elbow shake, and someone's put some music to it, and it's very witty. Ethiopia confirmed the 5th case on March 15 since the confirmation of the first case on March 13. My model shows they have in excess of 4-digit cases. We have to ask the question, how strong are our monitoring systems, especially those in rural areas or with limited technology? That is a reality on the continent, and perhaps why we have not seen a surge in cases, public health researcher Dr. Shakira Chunara told the Associated Press. Professor Cheryl Cohen with South Africa's National Institute for Communicable Diseases expressed concern that the current numbers could rise rapidly. I said, on the 2nd of March, the first issue is whether the coronavirus will infect the continent, and that we know that it is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. And I was predicting it would. These are the latest case numbers from WHO Afro. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China. And I don't want to play down what is happening in China, he said. We are past the point of no return on the continent. Wuhan went from an index case in November 2019 to several thousand cases by mid-January 2020. thus going from initial seeding event to widespread local transmission in the span of 10 weeks. That's TRVRB. And I agree with him. International seeding events have started to occur in mid-January. Thus, we have a critical 10 weeks from then to late March to contain these nascent outbreaks before they become sizable. I did an interview with Bruce Whitfield about my extreme concerns about coronavirus making landfall in Africa. Nothing, 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 cluster, 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 and then boom. 27th of January, I said I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty. 3rd of February, I was citing Bole as the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness, notwithstanding the fact that it's Europe connectedness, which has imported a lot of the cases, but I'm sure there are a lot of cases which were imported via China-Africa which have not been diagnosed. Africa's economic growth may slow to 1.8% this year from 3.2% as global supply chains are disrupted and investments drop, according to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. It's going to be lower than that. Yield on Zambian Eurobonds due in 2022 surged 2,175 basis points to a record 46.5%. I said last year the canary in the coal mine is Zambia. Zimbabwe's inflation 540.16% year on year in February. South African All Share down 29.05% year to date. Dollar Rand has slumped as well. I said that the ZAR is the purest proxy for this China emerging markets frontier feedback loop phenomenon. Egyptian pound 15.75, EGX30 down 32.46%, Nigerian All Share down 15.41%. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.13%. Nairobi All Share down 20.77%. NSE20 down 22.47%. It's carnage in Africa. Thank you.